Hi everyone and welcome back to my channel, or welcome to my channel if it is your first time here. My name is Jess. Today's video is going to be my April reading wrap up, and honestly the end of April feels like it was such a long time ago. I should probably be sitting down to film my May reading wrap up, but I've just fallen a little bit out of time with my uploading schedule. I've got quite a lot of videos that are either half edited or half finished, and I just need to try and catch up. Things have been incredibly busy at work and yeah, just fallen a little bit out of sync. So I'm going to do my April reading wrap up today. I'll have my summer TBR ready for next week, then my May wrap up, and then hopefully I will be able to catch up with all the videos that I've sort of half done, because I'm really excited to share with you all what I've been reading and what I have been doing. Just haven't had time to sit and kind of get it all together. So here are the books that I read in the month of April. So the first book that I read was the X Hex by Erin Sterling. This is paranormal romance. I actually ordered this and another book online when I was ill in bed with COVID, and I was just looking for something easy to read. This I picked up and read the day that it arrived, so it was very much what I was looking for at the time. So as I said, this is paranormal romance. We are following a witch called Vivian who accidentally places a curse on someone after a summer fling. So she has a relationship with someone called Reese. He leaves at the end of the summer, and in her heartbreak she accidentally places a curse on him. Unfortunately, Reese is part of a very powerful magical family. Flash forward several years and he has come back to the place where Vivian lives, and because of the curse, strange and crazy things start happening, and Vivian and Reese have to work together to lift the curse. So this is very much an enemies to lovers trope. I thought that it was very entertaining. I gave it 3 stars. I think this is the type of book that, although it fit the bill at the time, on reflection it's probably the type of book that I would have preferred to watch in the form of a rom-com rather than read about. I thought that it was quite surface level. I didn't really love any of the characters, and it was probably a little bit over the top in places. But on the whole, I enjoyed it. It was a solid romance. As I say, I gave it 3 stars. If you like this type of book, if you like this type of trope, then I think you would probably enjoy this. Next, we have The Salt Path by Raina Wynn. This is a non-fiction which I have talked about quite a lot. It was recommended to me by a volunteer at work. So this is about Raina and her husband Moth, who basically lose everything due to a bad investment. So they have a farm in Wales which they rent out as a holiday home. They have adult children. They've been married for a number of years, and then Moth makes a bad investment choice and they lose absolutely everything. On top of that, Moth is then diagnosed with a neurological condition which will essentially see his physical and mental capacities fail, and they can't give a time scale for that, but they just know that it's coming, and it essentially feels like a death sentence to the couple. So they sofa surf with friends for a couple of months, and then they decide to walk the 630-mile southwest coast with basically whatever they can carry. It is an incredible story. They are incredibly brave. For me, the interest lay in the way that people interacted with them. So I think I've mentioned this before, sorry if I'm repeating myself, but basically if the assumption was made that Raina and her husband were backpacking, that was seen as a very middle class thing to do, and people were quite envious of it. They would say to them, oh, I wish we could just leave everything behind and go camping wild and do this and do that, and the interactions were really different. If they then revealed that they'd had no choice but to do it because they were homeless, the way that people interacted with them was then extremely different. And I just thought that it was a really interesting look at how society deal with people who have fallen on hard times. It doesn't go into a whole heap of detail about it, that's not what the book is about, but just those little interactions that were scattered throughout, because I work with people who have fallen into the cycle of poverty, who are either homeless or they're living in temporary accommodation, or really they're just at a crisis point and they need to use food banks. So it was really interesting hearing from someone who has that lived experience of how they felt during those interactions and how they felt they were treated and that kind of thing. As I say, that's not what the book is about, but that's why it was recommended to me. Just, you know, I don't rate non-fiction, but it was a great read. It was really interesting. I am in admiration of what Raina and her husband did. They were in an extremely low place and they took it upon themselves to undertake this huge task, basically with just what, as I say, what they could carry. What was also interesting was the impact that it had on their mental and physical sense of well-being. Yeah, it was really interesting how it benefited both of them in ways that they didn't quite anticipate, which I also thought was quite interesting. But yeah, on the whole, I just really enjoyed it. I'm going to pick up her other book, which I think is called The Wild Silence. Yeah, just a very interesting read. Then I picked up Daughter of Smoke and Bone by Laini Taylor. This is a YA fantasy trilogy, which I had hoped to read and complete in spring. I did pick up this one, I did finish it. I haven't yet picked up books 2 and 3. They are going to go on my summer TBR. So this is about Karou. She is a 17-year-old art student living in Prague, and on the surface she appears to be just your average student, apart from her regular mysterious disappearances, because it turns out that Karou has access to another world. Karou doesn't know at the start of the book that her family are essentially considered monsters in this other world until she meets an angel, and everything that Karou thought that she knew about this other world basically gets turned on its head. There is a civil war brewing between the angels and the monsters. Her access to this world is being cut off, and there are quite high stakes building for Karou and her life as she knows it. I gave this 4 stars. I thought that it was good. It wasn't quite what I was expecting. I really thought I would love it. I loved Laini Taylor's other books that I have read by her. I really love her writing style. I loved her writing style in this. It was just as beautiful and poetic as I was expecting it to be, and that's partly why this got 4 stars. Where it was let down, I think it was a little bit boring. I think I was expecting more from it. It was very much just setting the scene, and it was very much just Karou discovering more about this world, but we didn't really get to know that much more, and I think I was just expecting a little bit more depth from it as a whole. I'm interested to see where Laini Taylor is going to take the rest of this series and what she's going to do with the future books. I'm definitely going to read books 2 and 3, there is no doubt about that. But yeah, I think I was just expecting more in terms of content from this first book, and also there is a bit of a twist at the end which I didn't actually like that much. It wasn't what I was expecting, hence it being a twist. But yeah, I didn't like it very much. It didn't fit with where I thought the story was going. I'm not writing it off. I would recommend it. I'd always recommend Laini Taylor's books because, as I say, her writing is just beautiful, and it may be that books 2 and 3 completely blow me away. Certainly this was a solid start to the series. As I say, I gave it 4 stars. It was okay. Please do not come for me with the next book that I read, because actually when I finished it I gave it 3 stars and I have since downgraded it to 2, primarily because when I sat down to film this video and I started to try to recall what the books were about, there was very little about this book that I could remember that I had liked. So talking about It Ends With Us by Colleen Hoover, I know that this is a book which is extremely well loved in the book community, but it just missed the mark for me, unfortunately. So this is contemporary fiction about Lily. Lily has grown up in a house with domestic violence, so she has not had the easiest childhood. Be aware that that is a major theme in this book, so major trigger warning for domestic abuse and domestic violence. And she finds solace in helping a young boy called Atlas who finds himself homeless whilst she is a teenager, and then they part ways. Lily is grown up, she is about to launch out on a new business venture, and one evening she is on a rooftop and she runs into a guy called Ryle. They have an instant connection. Lily finds herself being a little bit more daring than she would normally be. They part ways, then they randomly bump into one another, and they start a relationship. But it turns out that Ryle also has a temper, and so Lily finds herself essentially in the same situation as her mother. And then Atlas comes back into her life very abruptly, and Lily finds herself caught in something of a love triangle. So the reason that I didn't like this book, there were two reasons. The first was that I thought the characters lacked depth. I didn't like any of the characters in this book, and that's not something that I would necessarily be against in a book if they were well developed and well thought through. I just didn't feel that that was the case in this book. Lily particularly I found very difficult to empathise or sympathise with. And I think again that's just because she lacked depth as a character. The second thing that I really didn't like was the writing style. Now, I have bought another Colleen Hoover book. I have bought Verity, which I know is another book which is very well loved in the book community, so I'm not writing her off as an author, but I really didn't gel with her writing style. I found that it was really lazy and repetitive. So one example which literally happens right at the start of the book, when Lily meets Ryle, he is very angry about something and he's kicking something, and he is kicking, so he's kicking a chair, and Lily has this internal thought, that chair must be made from marine grade polymer. I once watched my father back over an outdoor patio table made of marine grade polymer, and it practically laughed at him. So twice now she's told us this chair is made of marine grade polymer, and then every single time she references the chair in the whole remainder of the scene, she refers to it as a marine grade polymer patio chair. And it was the kind of thing that it's such a small thing, but it was so repetitive and over the top, and it happened the whole way through the book. So it would be something like, he took a photo of me lying in a lounge chair. He showed me the photo of me lying in a lounge chair. I looked at the photo of me lying in a lounge chair. Like the same phrase repeated over and over and over again within a paragraph. And honestly, once I'd noticed it, then I just spotted it all the way through the book, and I really just didn't gel with it at all. So as I say, I know this is a book that is really well loved. Please don't come for me. There are books that some people really, really love, and there are some books that are just misses for people, and this was a miss for me. As I say, I downgraded it to 2 stars. I really just didn't get on with it, I'm afraid. Then on to a book that I really did love. This was the book that I also bought at the same time as the X Hex. It's The Girl with the Louding Voice by Abby Dare, and I loved this book so much. So this is literary fiction about a young girl called Adunni who is growing up in a remote Nigerian village, and Adunni sadly loses her mother at quite a young age, at quite a formative part of her life. She is then essentially sold to be the 3rd wife to quite an influential man in her village. Something happens and she ends up having to flee for her life. She takes a new identity as a maid in a large house where she is subjected to all kinds of horrific abuse and indignities. And yet her character in this story, as we're following along with her and her internal musings and her thoughts, there is just such a sense of humour. There is an honesty, there is a brevity to her situation. You know, she has very limited opportunities and very limited chances to change her life, and yet she's very realistic about that. But there is also this sense of hope that flows throughout. Honestly, the whole thing was completely spot on, and the writing style was just incredible. There was almost this lyrical poetry to it, and there was like a rhythm to the writing style that meant you felt like it was told in poetry even though it wasn't. It was just so good. I would highly recommend it. Adunni was a fantastic main character that you could really root for and get behind, and yeah, it's just the telling of her story and what happens to her, but it is just absolutely fantastic. I would highly recommend it. Next, I read Daughters of Night by Laura Shepherd Robinson. This is a classic Jess situation in that this is a follow-on book from another one, but I picked this one up without having read the first one, primarily because my mother-in-law lent this to me and she said she couldn't put it down and she absolutely flew through it. She thought it was fantastic. Did I want to borrow it? So naturally I said yes, and I will go back and read the first one. They're kind of companion novels. You don't have to have read the first one, but events that happen in the first one are referenced quite a few times in this book. So this is historical fiction. It's set in 18th century London, and we are following Caroline Corsham, a woman of means who finds herself investigating the murder of a prostitute when she becomes entangled in the crime. But there is so much more to Caroline's involvement in this situation than first meets the eye, and this was just fantastic. It was so well crafted, it was so readable, it was atmospheric, it was tense. You really got the sense that something was going on that you could kind of get a sense of, but it was just slightly outside of you being able to grasp it and see what it was. It was just, oh, it was fantastic. We follow from Caroline's perspective, but we also follow from an investigator's perspective who is down on his luck and he's helping Caroline. Honestly, I just thought this was so compelling and so good, and I was exactly the same as my mother-in-law. I couldn't put it down once I'd got into it. I'm really looking forward to picking up the first book now and also seeing what else Laura Shepherd Robinson writes, because I thoroughly enjoyed this. If you like historical fiction with that kind of detective crime element to it, I think you'll really enjoy this. I gave it 4.5 stars. I thought it was great. And then the final book that I picked up in the month of April was my book club's pick. The theme was banned books, and the one which was voted for was All Quiet on the Western Front by Eric Remarque. It was quite interesting for me picking this up. This is World War fiction told from the perspective of a young German soldier. Having recently read Birdsong, which is also about frontline soldiers and their experiences, and then picking this one up, and I said in my video when I was talking about Birdsong that I've read a lot of World War fiction, but never anything really set predominantly on the front line, about the frontline experience. So to pick that one up and then to have to read this one so close to it, it was just a very interesting book, and I found myself making a lot of comparisons. So as I say, this is about a young German boy's frontline experience. He is basically goaded by his school teacher to go and sign up for the army with a group of his friends, and then we are following their experiences literally on the front line. This book was incredibly difficult to read at points. It is brutal, it is visceral, it is raw. We really get a sense of the shock to the system, the way that they became enveloped in this bubble of horror and they just got used to it, this constant fear for their lives and how they felt, the brutality of war in how many of them left and how few of them came back. Essentially, our main character in this book loses everybody that he goes to war with. It's really quite graphic in its telling of what went on, but very realistic as well, a very fair reflection for a lot of the experiences of these young boys. And I think it was clever of Remarque to choose a character that was at such a formative age, because they had an expectation for how their lives were going to be. They were young men setting off at the end of their education, and instead they find themselves in the middle of a battlefield. And so yeah, it was a very clever age for Remarque to make his characters, which really felt that sense that their lives had just gone completely astray from where they imagined. And he references it quite a few times, that some of the older soldiers, they have something to live for because they have wives, they have families, they've had a life, whereas these young men were very much on the cusp of adulthood and just becoming who they were meant to be, and everything just kind of gets turned upside down on its head. So yeah, I thought it was absolutely fantastic. It's a really short book and I thought that I would fly through it, but I absolutely didn't, because it's a very weighty book. There is no word, there is no phrase in this book that is fluff or accidental or added in for the sake of adding in padding. Every single moment in this book is intentional and it's meant to be there, and it makes it quite a weighty story to read. A very important story, a very worthwhile story, but a very weighty story. I thought it was fantastic. I think I'd actually given it 4.5 stars before the live discussion, and then during the discussion I realised actually how much I had enjoyed it. and so I upped it to 5 stars. If you like World War fiction, I would thoroughly recommend this book. So there you go, they are the books that I read in the month of April. Let me know what you've been reading recently. Let me know if you've read any of the same books that I have and what you thought about them. I always love to chat more with you in the comments. As always, thank you very much for watching. I hope that you are all keeping safe and well. Take care, and I'll see you soon.